I'm good.
Okay, we're ready? We're good?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tiana Keith, and today we're going to be talking about some of the research that I did while I was at Cal State, specifically the follower categorization assessment, or FCA. So I went ahead and put handouts out for everyone, so that's kind of just like a brief rundown of the study that we did, and on the back there's a correlation table. So if anybody has any questions or wants to talk about it, I'm happy to do so after class because this research was really interesting to me. So let's go ahead and get started. There we go. Okay, so there's an outline for today. So first we're going to go into a little bit of what the toxic triangle is. And we're also going to talk about the FCA itself. We're going to go over the different types of followers, as well as the results, implications, and utility of the research. Okay, so to start, the toxic triangle is a branch of research that looks at the relationship between destructive leaders, susceptible followers, and conducive environments. So the FCA focuses specifically on the follower branch of this research. It was hypothesized that there were different types of followers and that each of these follower types had different characteristics or attributes associated with them. So the first follower type is a conformer. So the conformer tries to reduce the consequence of non-compliance with their leader. They comply for a variety of reasons. So some of the reasons could be fear, unmet personal needs, low maturity, low self-evaluation. And there's three different types of conformer. The first type is a lost soul. So the lost soul typically follows a leader because that leader gives them a sense of community, belonging, direction, and self-esteem. The second type is the authoritarian. So the authoritarian believes in hierarchy. So they are likely to follow a leader just because that leader has a higher rank than they do. And they also believe that leaders have a right to exert power over other people. So for this type of follower, we hypothesized that they would be associated with a submissiveness to authority. The next kind of follower is the bystander. This is a very common type of follower, and they are more passive. And they typically comply with leaders because that compliance gives them a feeling of safety from retaliation. So it was hypothesized that this type of follower would be associated with avoiding conflict or low risk taking. So the second type of follower is the colluder. Now colluders are different from conformers because colluders will actively participate in the destructive behaviors that leaders are exhibiting. So they believe that compliance will lead to some form of personal gain, and they typically also adopt the same worldview as the leader that they're following. So there are two different types of colluders. The first is the acolyte. So the acolyte shares common beliefs and values with their leader. They also tend to internalize the goals of their leader as their own. So it was hypothesized that this type of follower would be associated with different forms of organizational commitment. The second kind of follower for this is the opportunist. So the opportunist tends to follow a leader because they think that compliance will lead directly to rewards. And it was hypothesized that this type of follower would be associated with distrust of others and control of others. So what did we find? So we found that there were 5 general factors, which is good. That means that there are 5 distinct follower types and that they can be measured. So this image up here is the correlation table, and this shows specifically the attributes that we thought would be associated with follower types. So there were 2 really interesting findings. There was actually way more than 2, but for the sake of time, I'm only going to talk about 2. So the first was that acolytes correlated positively on all organizational commitment and organizational-based self-esteem, self-concept clarity, and social assurance. So this means that the acolyte follower type has a strong sense of organizational identity. This also implies that this type of follower may define themselves only in terms of their job. So the second cool finding was that opportunists correlated positively with impulsiveness. So this was really interesting because there has been other research that has said that impulsiveness might be genetic. So if impulsiveness is genetic, then that means that the type of follower that you are might be genetic too. So what can we do with these findings? So the first thing that we can do with these findings is to guide future research. So there is very little research in terms of the follower branch of the toxic triangle, and there's even less when you consider the follower in a toxic environment. So the second thing that we can do with this research is we might be able to use it to identify follower types and increase their well-being in the workplace. So for example, if we take this measure and we use it on an individual in the organization and they come back as a lost soul, we know that lost souls typically look to their leaders for some form of guidance or sense of community or sense of belonging. So we can use that information to send this individual to any community-based events that take place within the organization. So if you have your IT team that goes out for karaoke on Fridays, or you have an organization-based softball team, or you do any kind of event with your organization, we can send these individuals towards that. And hopefully that will increase their sense of community within their workplace, and that could be either with or without a leader. So in conclusion, we went over the toxic triangle, the FCA, and we looked to see what kind of attributes would be associated with what kind of followers. We also went over polluters and conformers and the characteristics of each. We went over the possibilities of genetics being involved in what kind of follower they might be. And we talked about how we might increase well-being with these findings. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
First of all, I want to say great job. That was such a great presentation.
Thanks.
I just had a question.
Sure.
On this table, so what would the effect sizes be for each of these values which correspond with the cone speed of a 0.2 is a small effect, and 0.5 is a medium
Yes.
effect?
Yes, that is how we established it. There is like a 20-ish page paper that I tried to boil down as much as possible. But yes, it is how we calculated our effect sizes. I honestly can't remember all of the effect sizes. There were so many tables. So I figured that the correlation table was one of the most important ones, and also one of the most easiest, one of the easiest ones for people to digest because they're correlations. So I kind of stuck with that. But if you want a copy of the paper, I will happily bring one for you.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Anybody else?
Oh, come on, there's gotta be more, yeah.
Yes.
So Tiana, great job. I love how you provided the real world example at the end of like how you can incorporate this in the workplace.
Mhm.
So do you have any ideas for how you would deal with like a polluter bystander?
You mean somebody that's like a combination of the two? Oh wait, so sorry, just a bystander.
Yeah.
Okay, so well, we can, if we're looking at this, we see that the hypothesis here was that the bystander would correlate negatively with avoidance and with risk taking. So our results show that this one, so risk taking, was significant and it was negative. So if we were looking at a bystander and we saw based on these results that they were showing a negative correlation with risk taking, then that gives us the information that they're not taking any risks at all. So we can look at other things that also correlate as well. I think ambition also correlated negatively. So we can take a combination of those two things and maybe introduce goal setting for that type of individual. So if they correlate negatively on that risk taking and on that ambition, we could kind of set them up with some smaller goals, something that we know that is within their ability, something that we can work with them to create, and then, you know, work upwards from there. So give them more and more challenging goals. And I think that would be something that, you know, like HR could do, managers could do, supervisors, anything like that. Does that answer your question? Okay. Anybody else? Dr. Fuller, do you have any questions?
Questions? No.
Okay.
I think you did really well. Obviously, this is content you know well. I like how you made it accessible, relevant, you know, for people. That's one of the hardest things for research to do.
It was very difficult. My lab manager and I went rounds on this research for why it would be and why it wouldn't be applicable in workplace.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very, very heated moments.
I can imagine, because there's a lot of strategy involved, like what the implications could be or what they might be, and then how do you actually do something with that? Like, is there an intervention
Yes.
that's applicable here, right?
Yes.
So that's a challenge, but outside of the purview of, you know, this particular research. What would you do? I guess, what would you do to take this research to the next step? Like, what's next in the iterative process of research?
In the next process of research, I think would be further validation. It would be taking the measures that we used and put them in a different context, such as an actual organization, and see if these results still hold up outside of a college environment. Because our sample was students from California State University, San Bernardino, specifically undergrad students. So undergrads may not have that work experience with a toxic leader that is needed for this research. But regardless of that, some of these still came up quite strong. If you look at Machiavellianism, it has a correlation of 0.47 with opportunists. That to me was absolutely fascinating. And you can also look at opportunists and see that we had solid correlations all up and down here. So that means that we might be on the right track, even if it's just for one follower. Like we might be, you know, going down the right path to find opportunists. So if I were to take this research, I would definitely want to do the exact same thing that we did, maybe clean it up a little bit, and put it in an organization and see if the results still hold up.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I think that would be a good next step, logical next step for that. Another comment that I would make is sometimes, this applies to everybody, when you're intimately knowledgeable in the information, you speak at a level that is wonderfully confident, but it can, not you in this particular presentation, but all of us, can speak to it in great depth. In 5 minutes, or to people that don't have that same understanding of the material, we need to simplify it and make it actionable, make it like a burning platform, like almost like an executive summary of this. Like, what is this in its most like simplistic form, right? This elevator pitch of the research that you did, and why do they absolutely have to implement or take notice or do something, right, with this content? Not that that's something you have to do. It's just something to be aware of when you do have an audience with someone that could implement this. They might not be, of course, they won't be as familiar with research. They might not be familiar with research at all. Right. So the way in which we talk can be quite different. I know in talking with people that, you know, did their PhDs in IO, did research, as soon as they get into the consulting world, nobody calls them doctor or anything.
Oh yeah.
Like they don't, it's first names. And if you try and throw in research around, people will walk away from you.
Yeah, I've actually found that in my own personal experiences, things that I thought that I had my elevator pitch for what IO psychology was and what I did down to a science. And then I tried it on my parents and some of their friends, and it just yeah.
Well, even in like business circles that are like major consulting firms, not that they don't like research, they don't have the time, nor do organizations care what the research says. All they want to know is what's the easiest, simplest, cheapest thing for me to do to get the most impact for what I'm doing. So it's a different strategy, different audience. But I like this a lot. Obviously, the audience here is very open to like research and data and everything. It would be different for a different audience, but I thought it was very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good job.
All right. Well, if bringing it down a few levels in intellectual level, Huckleberry. So, the differentiator. I like that word. Research is a differentiator for IO. We talked last week a little bit about how we see ourselves, how we act, how we see the field in terms of doing research and putting it into practice. So all of us are going to do the science. So the importance of research, I was glad listening to Dr. Fuller that I don't think he too much contradicted what I was going to say about the importance of research. I really think of it as looking for the things that matter. I'm going to talk about mostly in terms of looking at data and finding what's important in the data. Following the data where it takes you, making sure that you're following it to the right place. And that, of course, leads to right conclusions and ideally the correct solution. So this is from our reading from the Yost paper, obviously, and these 5 characteristics of HR interventions, specifically in reading. I think they apply to just about any intervention. We're all going to want to have these characteristics in what we do for our clients. The 2 that I want to focus on in terms of the data are how does it relate to an organization's strategic needs and their strategic direction. And then I'm going to sneeze on you guys because I thought that the things I'm about to show you are interesting and cool, otherwise I wouldn't really be up here with them. So I work at Southern California Edison. One of the projects that I've been tasked with over the past several months has been to look at some safety data and put together presentations for one particular work group on how they might address some of the issues, some of the trends that we're seeing based on the data. So we're going to look at vehicle incidents and helicopter work and the issues that surround that, and also knife safety. And we're going to see some pretty divergent trends in the safety data from those 3 areas, but I think they all 3 lead to some very interesting places. So vehicle incidents, you can see right here, there are hundreds of these kind of incidents per year in Edison. They have a lot of workers driving a lot of trucks and going to a lot of different places. And so incidents, these do not necessarily mean injuries. In fact, that was a part of what I had spoken with the manager who requested this information and training was that serious injuries are relatively rare in vehicle incidents. So even that picture I showed you a minute ago where the truck rolled over, that driver walked away after being helped out by a passerby. So for this particular set of data for vehicle incidents, we weren't so interested in looking at injuries. The company is very interested and very dedicated to protecting its workers, but since that was less prevalent with vehicle injury or vehicle incidents, we wanted to look at the sheer number of the incidents themselves and acknowledge that even if there is no injury, every vehicle incident has a huge impact on the company. There's a huge ripple effect in terms of the manager has to deal with it, there's paperwork to fill out, the truck needs to be replaced, they need to find another one for that crew to go out and work the next day. Go up through the directors, through the VPs, legal might need to get involved, Cal OSHA, the union might come sniffing around. So there are all kinds of effects and all kinds of drains on company resources from an incident, even if there is no injury. And of course, that's compounded if there is. So what we determined to do for this particular issue for vehicle incidents and trying to reduce that was we put together a small training module for, this was a group of field workers. They work out in Menifee, Wilmar area. And we delivered them a small training module on winter and bad weather driving techniques. This was back in January, so it was applicable to the time. And the reasoning was even if we can just make a small percentage difference in how many incidents there are, just by giving these people a little bit more control over some of the things they do have control over, with the sheer number that we're talking about, even a small reduction would have a measurable impact and a benefit for bottom line as well as keeping people safe. Next, we'll talk about helicopter safety. And if you're like me, that's the first thing you think of when you think of safety on a helicopter. You want that thing to crash. It's certainly not unheard of. We are not that far removed from well-known incidents like Kobe Bryant and the other people who were riding with him, all perishing in a helicopter crash. I'm happy to say that's actually not what the data showed we have to worry about. Numbers of incidents are very low. So much like air travel, helicopter work is statistically very safe. And you can see just the small number of incidents per year that these have to do with injuries. None of these were a crash. None of these were a mechanical failure of the helicopter itself. And in fact, I think Edison's last crash of a helicopter was about 15 years ago. So thankfully, it really is very rare that there is an issue with the flight of the helicopter. What we found is that the safest place to be in helicopter work is inside the helicopter. So of these numbers here, and admittedly they're small, it's a small sample size, but only one of the people that were that was injured in one of these incidents was actually flying in a helicopter. Everything else is from the people working around and under the helicopter. So I love this visual. The moment I saw it, it just shows what one of the major hazards is. There is stuff flying around, especially with the work that Edison does. A lot of time they're out in rural areas. There's a lot of dust, dirt, gravel. They do try to clean up their landing zones as much as possible before bringing a helicopter in, but there's only so much you can do. And so the hazard is not to the people in the air operations department who fly the helicopters, maintain the helicopters. It's to the people who are working on the ground around it, and the helicopter is coming to assist their work. But they're the ones that, for the greatest impact for safety, they need to be reminded, you've got to have your hard hat, it's got to have your boot strap so it doesn't go off, you've got to have your goggles, eye protection. There's all these things in the air, or things can fall from the helicopter. We did have instances where one member of the crew on the ground gave the signal to release the payload, release the rope from the helicopter, and down comes this 3-inch line with a great big metal shackle on the end and hits somebody else on the ground. So again, the helicopter is not the problem, it's things falling or flying above. And that's what we wanted to emphasize in the training. And then we have knife incidents. So Edison workers carry their knives with them all the time. It's one of the most frequent tools that they use. They don't always use it correctly or for the job that it's intended for, but because it's always there on their belt and it's very easy to get at, you don't have to climb back down the pole or what have you to rotate a different tool. They do tend to use knives a lot. So this particular image was taken from one of the things that Edison does is if you're injured, they will make you recreate the incident and they will take pictures of you and then they will distribute that around as part of an incident report so that everybody in the company can talk about how we're not going to do what this one lady did. So you can see here he's got a wooden stand-in for the knife and you can see the scar on his hand, which is the actual injury that he sustained. So we'll talk about that a little bit because this is a very representative example. So go back here. So he's cutting the insulation off this table, and right here he's doing it in the approved way. As they say in training, you should cut towards your buddy, not your body, so you're drawing the knife away from yourself. And he did that, but he decided he could get a better cut, a better angle, if he turned the knife around and drew it towards himself, and indeed, it went right into his hand. So statistically, you can see these kinds of incidents are less than vehicle incidents, obviously, hundreds per year, more than helicopter incidents, but there's two things about the knife incident data that I thought were really interesting. One, just surrounds the type and severity of injury that it tends to be. So almost every single knife injury happened to the hand or the fingers. And that's pretty intuitive just based on the way that you work with a knife and you're holding something you're cutting. The other small percentage of injuries occurred to the knee. So I guess if you're sitting down, you got something, knife slips, or even standing up. I really like to think about that. It's bad enough to think about cutting my hand. I don't want to think about a knife going into my knee. But those are the things that happen. Mostly hands and finger injuries. 75% of all of those injuries, or all injuries with a knife, required more than basic first aid to treat. So we're talking stitches, maybe even surgery, at the very least several hours in the emergency room. So medical intervention is significant, even with a very small tool, maybe even a very small injury. So your odds of really dealing with a significant problem are very high if it's a knife. The other thing that follows from that is 25% of knife injuries resulted in lost time from training, or sorry, not training, from work. So the injury was severe enough not only to need additional treatment beyond first aid, but also required that person to spend some time recuperating. They couldn't do their normal work. There again, manager has to reschedule, find somebody to replace you. You've got to be put on light duty somewhere. So it really has a ripple effect throughout the organization when these things happen. And I think for managers, the most frustrating part of it is that knife incidents, if not completely, are very close to being completely preventable. Nobody was injured using a knife correctly. The only people who got hurt were the ones that, like in the example, decided to do something that is not in the training, not in the organization. So people need to be told it's a training issue, it's a managerial issue. It's kind of a culture thing, just because of the way that the crews work and the training that younger guys coming in get from the older workers who've been there forever. If the culture can change and if the training can be delivered, that actually gives the message that, hey, you gotta use your knife correctly, or go get one of these other dozen specialized tools that we have for the particular work you're trying to do. Use your knife for what it's meant for cutting rope, for cutting damaged slings. Grab the other tool to do the other stuff. Then that can, I think, come pretty close to 100% of eliminating these issues right here. So last thing I want to talk about, this is just a real quick video, a couple minutes long, and really goes to the idea of following the data where it actually leads, not where it seems to be leading. Does this look familiar to anybody? Have any of you guys come across this before? Okay, good. I was hoping this wasn't something they teach in every undergrad psychology class these days. You guys will do it. So I'm going to go ahead and play this.
At the beginning of World War I, when the various civilized nations of the world went about killing each other with a new and frightening efficiency, the various armies were equipped with cloth caps. And the front of the battle in Western Europe stagnated, and men were standing around in trenches all day, and a meticulous record was kept of casualties. And people noticed that an awful lot of head wounds were being recorded. And it was considered after a while wise to issue the men with helmets.
Is that loud enough? I got the volume maxed. Next. 1 second.
And men had these on their heads as they stood around in the trenches all day. And you would think that would help. But something extraordinary happened. It was noticed that almost immediately the number of men reported with head wounds went up 5-fold. Now, why do you think that should be? Now, at the end of this video, I'll be giving you the answer. Now, up in high command, they were saying, "Great Scott, what the devil is going on? We've issued these men helmets to save their lives. We just ended up making things worse. Are we in command of such idiots that they think they can put their heads above the parapet with impunity now? Just because we've given them some tin hats? Well, one thing's fair enough. The order must go out immediately. The men must be forbidden from wearing those hats. But fortunately, wiser heads prevailed, and other people who wanted the statistics a bit better were able to point out what actually was going on, and the men were allowed to keep their helmets."
Real quick, does anybody have a guess as to what the issue was? Yeah.
Okay, I'm just gonna throw it out there. Were the helmets shiny?
Not that I know of, but interesting guess. Do you mind saying why you think that might have been a part?
Okay, it's a really weird story, but I bought a big like Maglite flashlight for my dad a couple years ago, and he was adamant on having one that had a matte finish on it because he was like, if it's shiny, it's gonna reflect light and people will see me coming.
Gotcha.
So that's what I thought of.
Reasonable. Yes, Marina, right?
Were they more reckless because it felt safer?
That is what the high command seemed to be thinking, yes. So that, I think that's a pretty plausible explanation as well. Anybody else? Maybe one more? Yeah.
The concussion from the bombs going off.
Okay. Interesting, but I don't want you to follow that too closely because I think we're going to get there in just a second. Oh, sorry.
Helmets. Okay, here's the answer to the problem. It was to do with statistics and the way people were listening in the hospitals. You see, what used to happen was a shell would land short, throw a load of clods of earth into the air, these rain down from a very great height onto people and kill them. And those men would be listed as dead. And instead, after helmets are issued, then they would land on the men and injure them. They would then be listed as head wound. And that's why there was a sudden, massive increase in the number of head wounds reported in the hospitals. Men who previously had been killed were being wounded in the head. So in fact, the helmets did quite a bit of good, and they still wore them in World War II.
All right, like I said, follow the data where it actually leads, not where it seems to be leading. And you'll get better solutions. You'll be able to apply them and get the buy-in from those senior VPs or CEO that. Next. Take questions and feedback. Yes.
I really enjoyed that when you were talking about helicopter injuries. I like that you included a recent event, the Kobe Bryant incident. I like the knife example. I heard many of the audience making noises that says, that we were all engaged. But yeah, it was really entertaining.
Good, thank you.
The graphs that you had, I was a tiny bit confused on because there was like a number up here and then a number in the middle, and it looked like the two keys on the bottom were the same color. Could you
Okay.
explain just like one of those graphs? Because I was really interested in what was there, but I was kind of having a hard time like following along with what was on those graphs.
Yeah, I apologize. I should have explained it when they were up. So we differentiated between the incidents that happened transmission distribution area, where this is being done for, and the rest of the company. So the majority of all those incidents on each graph were happening in TMB, and then the little tiny piece at the top of some of those were anybody else in the company that had that sort of.
Oh, okay, okay, cool, thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for calling it out.
No problem.
Yes.
You took note, I guess, from last week about like moving around the room, so good
Was it
job
that
for,
obvious?
well, no, I was like thinking about it, but I remembered that was a note given last week, so, we're improving.
Yeah. Nice. Anybody else, or Dr. Fuller?
Yeah, I thought your examples were really good, engaging, personal experience, right? Incredibly relevant because you're talking about safety. I think that's really nice. Yeah, those were all well done, well crafted. The video I thought was humorous and funny, but I don't know if you needed it. But you're already humorous and funny and engaging, so you didn't have to have that. And I think it was fine, but it prolonged a presentation that was already quite long.
Sure.
So when you're given, like, if this was in the context of a business meeting and they say, hey, you got 5 minutes, let's hit them with the key, things of why our department matters so much in, research or safety protocols or whatever, we got to stick to the 5 minutes. I think this was like a 15-minute presentation. So, you got to pare it down. And it's really hard when you have a lot of great content to get across to synthesize that down into these less than what you'd want, right? That's really difficult because you had a lot of great material to give. So just be cognizant, right, of the time constraint. But I thought in the future, I would just stick with the great content that you had, because when you're giving a presentation, it's hard to say. If you had more time, if it was like a 30-minute presentation or something, I think adding the video or something is okay. But for these brief little presentations, I would just stick with one modality, right? Like one PowerPoint, one thing, versus video. I liked the video, but I like you more than I like the video. I'll say that.
I appreciate it.
Yes, of course. Great job. Thank you.
Thanks.
everyone. So research, setting IO apart. So research in IO psychology, you have behavior change, maintaining, and future research. So behavior, improving our capacity for change, practitioner behavior goal setting, change, unfreezing, normative re-education, and learning culture. Maintaining, create sustainability interventions, sustainable interventions, innovate, make it innovative, top support, reward organizations, culture, lead from the middle, action-oriented, vision, confidence, and self-efficacy. Research, we have the golden standard, experimental model, quasi-experimental, and there's nothing wrong with correlation. But behavioral competencies and practitioner effectiveness. So you see, we have data utilization, gather information, to better understand the group, inform interventions, interpret the data, and present to client and provide feedback. Specific goals by set by managers and consultants jointly, and they're measurable and achievable. So we want to measure how we implement things and collect data and interpret it for the client. So HR interventions that go viral. So sustainable HR program, new directions to guide the future research, interventions that are more likely to succeed if they're built on characteristics that will go viral. To me, that's kind of like appealing to the population. Because everyone likes it, doesn't mean it's going to work. Buying in for long-term sustainability, individuals as change agents. So an innovative intervention are more likely to be adopted, but they're very often not verified. So we're kind of like starting with the conclusion. Top management support, reward systems encouraging innovation and risk taking. Within the culture, communication and intervention through all the levels, clear goal aligned with organizational needs, methods of introducing and staging intervention, and then leading from the middle, clear vision with direction, strategy, action-oriented, confident, self-efficacy, and focus on outcome, which is probably important, should be more important when we're implementing some kind of intervention, is to focus on the outcome. It's difficult when people or leaders are attracted to something that's innovative and something that everyone agrees on because it hasn't been really verified yet. So future research and methodologies. Focus on longitudinal issues that are aimed at determining aspects of intervention and theories that are sustainable and adaptable. We have a lot of interventions that are already being used and popular. For instance, situational leadership. A lot of corporations use it, but it hasn't really been verified by the science. So we have a lot of hypotheses and theories, if you even want to call them theories at this point, a lot of hypotheses about how intervention should be implemented and what kind of intervention should be implemented. So I think when we're looking for something that's easily digestible, it kind of brings up maybe conflict of interest, because sometimes the changes that need to happen are not easy changes, and we need to prove that they could possibly work. And there's also risks when you're using an intervention. It might not work, it might even harm some of your employees. So it's good to approach it in an ethical manner, and when you're applying to the standard of benefits and lowering your risks. So the gold standard, experimental model is great for establishing a degree of confidence with regard to inductive relationships, but quasi-experimental methods can still be used as a predictor. One of my mentors said you want to observe, predict, and control the problem, and if you cannot predict the outcome of a problem, then you don't understand. So it's important to be able to predict how these things are going to work or how your interventions are going to work and have some kind of support for that. So although causation is preferred, correlation is important in IO because the gold standard is an ideal method, difficult to attain in social science. You can't randomly sample. It's very hard to get a good sample. A lot of it you actually already have either the tests and measures are already being used. So it's good to aggregate the data and to maybe, instead of approaching it as a statistician, is to use the AI learning to help us aggregate the data, which is less about hypotheses and more about finding patterns in the data. So IO scientists collect data, we produce tests and measures to be used, like I just said, with AI learning to help organizations adjust to continuous change. AI learning produces an interpretive construct allowing greater internal validity. And AI's learning uses a large set of data, inherent ethical guidelines that we use in research help with that. So AI algorithms reduce bias, which is very important when we're constructing a study or some kind of measure. Because a lot of times the observer or the person who's making these tests and measures have some kind of implicit bias. We all have them. So AI helps reduce that implicit bias in the way it looks at the data. So scientific method, from what I can tell, and I know, we have a lot of finding the question, gathering information, and forming hypothesis. I feel like we have a lot more to do in actually testing a lot of these hypotheses that are being used. When you have a leader of a group who wants a convenient solution, sometimes they're not actually looking for something that they know is going to work. It's just easy, or they're already using it, their competitors are already using it. So we have a lot of hypotheses and leadership styles that we can already test and look at. I feel like IO needs to do more of the actual science from what I'm gathering. So a popular way to, I guess, better understand the data is to use, like I said, machine learning and AI. We have a lot of data already. We have a lot of internal tests and measures that corporations and organizations use. And I feel like looking for the pattern and using in the data and using its predictive value is almost more important than like setting the parameters or estimating errors or whatever. If you can predict the outcome, that's more important to me than in this kind of science than necessarily having a standard gold causational relationship. So here's a little diagram about the difference between stats, data mining, and whatnot. And I pulled from a lot of sources on this. I got two. This is the Nacht interview. He's an IO psychologist. He applies psychology, but he's also a computer scientist. He uses AI, and his whole thing is their goal is to improve inclusion and diversity by using AI. And I think this is kind of the future, in my opinion, of IO, is using, we have a lot of data, it seems like, but using the computer science to rule out the implicit biases that we all have. And what he did is, he had a friend who had a hard time like finding a job, and they just changed his name to sound more Western, and he got a job like the next week. So it inspired him to do more research into the implicit biases that we have in a lot of the tests and measures that we're already using. So AI looks for those patterns of biases and eliminates them. And yeah, that's what I got. Any questions, comments?
I really enjoyed the content and going through the different synthesis methods. The only thing is I just seem to start off really strong, but I think it would be beneficial logistically to have an introduction, just kind of slow the pace down and then go into your information. But
Awesome, thank you.
I have a question and a comment. Are you happy that that's over?
Yeah, I was really nervous.
Yeah.
I'm like not nervous when I'm there, and then the second that I get up here, I feel like, oh.
So, I mean, I think that was noticeable, especially because, like she said, you didn't really like pause. Maybe if you just take a breath and collect yourself before you start, because you kind of went right into it.
Okay.
The other suggestion is, like halfway through, when I was watching your eyes, halfway through when you stop reading your slides, you calm down, and I could actually hear the knowledge coming through you. But in the first half, you were just reading directly off the slide. So my suggestion would be, to put less text on your slides, just like maybe some bullet points to be your trigger point in your head for what you want to talk about. Because you sounded way more knowledgeable when you stopped reading the slide.
Okay, awesome.
Just a quick one. I would take more time to like scan through them a little bit. I noticed you spent a lot of time either reading your slides from back or facing the wall.
I was pleased.
Yeah.
I just had a question about your comparison of statistics and machine learning. So when you're saying low dimensionality versus high dimensionality, what does that mean? Like, is it the amount of data? Because I know that was a separate.
Yeah, we have a lot, there's like aggregate, so it uses machine learning to do the data mining, which you can see there's no, like we generate data. This is already, we have a lot of already generated data, and I feel like we can pull off of that. We don't have to have a fully experimental model to make predictions. We don't have to infer causation on everything, correlation's okay. And to me, the powers of the prediction is not in the establishing what's causation or not causation, because it's, in terms of induction and deduction, in computer science, they use a series of deductions to rule out alternative explanations and to arrive at the differential assumption, right? Whether with a certain degree of confidence. And so instead of this, like, they're going to have complete control over, your prediction to establish causation. They rule out and also rule out all of the alternative explanations. The AI does that by running all the truth and false. So it's kind of an interesting concept to use deduction. Like, I'm used to thinking of the truth of a confidence interval. It's not really like, it's kind of like counterintuitive. So to use, deduction to arrive at deductive cause and effect argument is pretty amazing to me. Having to take the logic, usually they're like one or the other. Right? Because there's no truth in causation. Confidence interval if it's in that before this first time. Right?
Okay, so it's like analytics.
Yeah, it's more based on the analytics, like you can see it's big data. While you have the statistics, you don't have that questionable data side. We're always trying to focus on having a randomized sample. This is like, we have a bunch of data and we can look for patterns in the data and try to get outcomes based on that, as opposed to trying to pick the gold standard, this perfect experiment, just so you can make a causation experiment.
Oh,
Like, because like causation might not matter if you can predict the outcome using correlation.
okay, cool, thank you.
That's just.
I was gonna say, I love how engaged and passionate you are on that topic. I honestly think that you should have talked about that.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I do too much. Someone else?
So just kind of to bounce off of what Joser said, like you were very passionate, very knowledgeable when you were asked a question. So maybe just something to think about going forward when you do your presentations, put a question on your presentation and then so ask yourself a question and then answer that question. Because yeah, when he asked that question, like, oh my goodness, like, he dove into it.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's him right there.
yeah.
I'm more comfortable now. I should just come up here and do that.
Yes.
Thanks for all the perspective.
Good job.
All right, so my name is Hannah Warner. Today I'm going to talk to you about experiments and how they have transformed over time. They say that you're supposed to start out your presentation with a joke or a story. but I'm afraid I don't have it. Awesome. So today I'm going to talk about the experimental and quasi-experimental designs for generalized causal reference. That was a mouthful, right? I mean, come on. So my goal is to address the text and understand how experiments had changed over time. And understand how IO psychologists can use research more in the workplace, right? So according to the text, Shaddis explained how how research development has changed. So first, observation gained popularity. So the philosophers were used observation to provide reasoning behind their understanding of the world, and they would kind of use these observations to argue against religious beliefs, and that's how they would understand what they wanted to know, right? Second, understanding of the importance of manipulation in experiments was important so that they could look at the IV and really manipulate that to find out, did it cause the DV, right? Third was controlling outside influences to test theories and eliminate biases. So if they could do that, then they could end up finding causal arguments and causal experiences. So today, discovering causation through experimentation and manipulation is used. And through our experiments, we can find out, right, when we do manipulate something, does A actually cause B? Or and also we can talk about does correlation, right? Correlation does not mean causation, so we need experimentation to do that. So our experiments over time have changed and developed. Before, in our past, we have a lot of dark, deep secrets. In our past, we do have the Tuskegee syphilis study, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, as well as the Stanford County Prison experiment. So these experiments were very instrumental, and the reason why we have developed the APA, the Association for Psychological, the American Psychological Association. And so because of that, we have kind of grown and gained understanding that it's important to bring ethics into experimentation and to further our understanding in an ethical approach. So, on the contrary, other experimentations now in our current day have shown instrumental to our success, right? So we have the Bobo doll experiment, the Hawthorne study, and classical conditioning. My favorite, because I'm an IO student, is the Hawthorne study, and I love how we understood the Hawthorne effect and how when we are doing research, how do people actually react when scientists are in the room, and whether or not does that change how our study's going to change based off of those experiments. So it's pretty instrumental to this change and development. And you can notice a difference of what we find out when you add in that ethical approach, right? It's a little bit more fun. So, how can IO use experiments more in research? So, one thing that I would like to see personally is we do more studies, right? So IO has been known to be more of the people who put things into practice, but I would love for us to do more research studies within the workplace and actually see what changes and what develops over time. IO psychologists can understand different fields of psychology in multiple facets. So by understanding performance management, leadership, ergonomics, training development. The ways that we could set up our experiments are by field trials, interviews, questionnaires, and case studies. Those are like my opinions on how we can bring more research into the workplace. So, if you want more research into the workplace, there are a few things that you can do based off of what I just provided. So one, you can determine your observation techniques, right? You can really go in there and understand how are we going to study our environment. The second thing is you can learn how to manipulate people, right? The last thing is we can eliminate bias by blocking out the haters. I mean, come on, like let's just stop it. And then don't assume causation. And the last thing is always be ethical, of course. Thank you. So I was nervous. So, anyone else have anything else to say?
I love that, although you were nervous, you kept going and like you took the time to calm yourself down and make that effort to like keep going because you have a lot of great information to share. So it made it easier for you to get through.
I was trying to like take breaths because I could feel my voice getting shaky, and I was like, okay, like everyone's here doing the same thing.
I enjoyed the information you provided. I majored in psych, so this is my thing. I love it all, and it was entertaining. I could just think I would have appreciated it even if you directly your flashcards, because when you had looked up and you engaged and provided your own opinions, that's when I was like, oh, I'm so into this. Like, this is great.
I'm trying to learn to like. I have specific points that I want to say, and I don't want to forget those points. So I want to look back because I'm like, okay, I don't want to let the nerves take over and like takes away from me actually getting like landing the joke that I want to say or something like that. But thank you so much. I think I cut you off.
Oh no, you're good. That was my judgment.
I really love the energy. It's very active.
Thank you.
Once you got into the things that you were really interested in, like when you started talking about the Stanford prison experiment and whatnot, like that nervousness disappeared.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you were always like very energetic and you seemed like you were excited about what you were talking about, but it was like as soon as those topics came up, you were just like, yes, like this is my jam. Special shout out to the outfit.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, before you go anywhere, you're still doing great. I would say, I mean, the feedback I think is definitely gaining in its benefit, and I appreciate that. So thank you everybody for taking the opportunity to give like really good feedback, not just like, hey, everything was perfect, great job, but trying to build each other up, and I love that. That's really good. So good job, all y'all. Very good. I love that you started with humor. That was great. Something that research has shown as well is if you're nervous, to go up there and say, I'm nervous, is fine. That actually helps.
Yeah, I looked at him and I was like, stop saying that so much. To myself.
So you look, yeah.
Because you were the closest person next to me. I was like, sidebar.
Okay. I was wondering, like, why did you think about Mark for that? But okay, I mean, it makes sense. He's really accessible. No, it's really, he's great. Like a lot of people that are close by, maybe you could lean on. Something that I think you may try is like up there, waiting a little bit before you start presenting. Because you were already like kind of nervously out of breath, and just calm yourself down. Have a ritual. This goes for everybody as well. Have a ritual when you're up there. You don't have to start as soon as you touch the podium, right? Like take a moment, take a breath, calm yourself down, tell yourself a joke, or like Mark did, which was brilliant. Don't even start your presentation yet. Give a joke first, like, and kind of ease into it instead of a hard start. Where it's like, and I'm starting now. And that just is overwhelmingly anxiety provoking, right? So if you can ease into it more seamlessly, that might work for you. I liked your humor. I love puns, by the way. So, I mean, by all means, go for it, because I'm a big fan. So that was, so that was great. But just as a possibility, if you want to be humorous or if you have that gift, then please do so, but in a way that makes it easier on you, less of a performance and more of a collaborative, like we're in this for an enjoyable, humorous evening together.
Yeah, I think, one thing that I realized that I did not like was the use of these flashcards, because I would look down and I'm like, okay, I know, like, I didn't even use this one, now it's just in my way, so I'm just gonna throw this away.
Yeah, toss it, it's fine. I think Jana had more, were you gonna say something? You can talk to her. Go on.
No, I just thought of something, so when I was up there, that chair was in the way, what if, cause like for me personally, just standing up there while you were getting ready really calmed me down.
Mhm.
So maybe if like you're planning on going next, would we be able to take that chair and like put it over here just to like,
Just go sit in it?
yeah, just to kind of sit in the space?
You can do whatever you
Before-
want.
like stage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just like, okay, I'm gonna go next. so
Like
I'm
you're
gonna go
on
sit
deck?
up there.
Oh, I love it. The on deck chair? That's so fun. That is so fun. I love that. You can do whatever you want. There are no like hard rules for this. Whatever works. Great job, and I didn't get to tell you, but great job.
Thank you.
Who's next? All right, Marina, let's go.
I looked around, I was like, these people are too attractive.
I know.
I know. Don't make me
I might. Is it a type C? Yeah. Oh, you got it? Okay, whatever you want. Yeah.
I just want to apologize in advance. I hate public speaking, so I'm going to be very, very patient with you. I swear throughout the semester I'm trying to do better, but
You will be better.
You got it.
it's just not going to go today, so.
Yes, it will.
Positive psychology. I'm Marina. So this week I'm doing a topic on research. Okay, so I want to find an overarching theme of going through all the articles, and one thing that kind of stuck out to me the most was the word behavior. So why is behavior so important? I would like for all of us to imagine that we are going to therapy. I'm going to give you guys two scenarios. So for scenario one, you come to therapy with an issue. You are given the basic mental tools to help. You're given a quick diagnosis and just a textbook explanation. Okay, so for scenario two, same thing, you are coming in with an issue, but the therapist shows empathy, takes the time to get to know you, shows that they care about your progress, and encourages you and motivates you to get better. So which scenario do you think would make you the happiest? I would like up to, yes. Wow, I didn't think you guys would get actually. So I like to talk about techniques versus behavior when talking about research and organizational development. For technique, almost all research is done based on technique rather than on behavior. Techniques would include survey feedback, management development, and process consultation. While behavior is more focused on the attitudes and the attributes of the consultants when they are with the clients. This would also be the behaviors that they're exhibiting when they're working on an intervention.
organizational development interventions. They are used to resolve organizational management issues. These activities include team building exercises to improve individual and group performance. There are usually 4 outcome goals when working with interventions. So the first being to enhance individual and group performance as well as the performance of the organization as a whole. Second would be to increase knowledge contributing to organizational productivity. Third is greater satisfaction, and fourth, increased profitability. So how can we best achieve these 4 outcome goals? I would like to say that a lot of it would have to do with behavior of the change agent. Research shows that characteristics of the person leading interventions can be important for long-term success, as well as the attitudes of consultants can improve quality of the activities for the interventions. And as Dr. Buller kind of showed in the slide earlier, some of the characteristics and attributes of these consultants. Carrie and Barney explained 3 areas of importance for organizational development practitioners, which would be self-awareness and personal impact awareness, conceptual, analytic, and research skills, and change in impact skills. Esper noticed 4 issues in organizational development research within practitioners, and that would be process skills, conceptual ability, communication skills, and understanding the consulting process. So how can we kind of embody that scenario to therapists as a consultant? I would like to think that the first would be to change and alter attitudes of change as necessary and likely to be successful. I find this to be important because if, as a consultant, you have the perspective that change is important and the intervention is going to be successful, it can kind of resonate with the client as well, that it is important and kind of motivate them a little bit more. The second would be to gather information about the organization to increase understanding of clients. So I also find this to be maybe actually the most important to me, because the more they get to know the company that you're working with, the more you can gain a better understanding of how you can help them and reach their goals. The third would be to make clear and specific goals and allow the clients to become involved in goal setting. It's also important for the client to get involved in creating their goals because it also shows what they find to be important to them, and then you can help them reach their goals. And last, to make intentional efforts regarding change to enhance improvement within the individuals. These are our resources.
I think your presentation was really good, and you were way more nervous, but like everything went perfect. Like you did a really good job, and you asked questions but answered them, and you did an amazing job. So thank you.
I like how just in terms of the presentation, it was so simple and clean, and also your bullet points went straight to the point. So if this was like an actual class, I can honestly write down everything, the amount of time that you were speaking, which is not a long time, and still grasp everything that you were saying. So that's what I really liked.
Okay, thank you.
I need to teach some videos of therapy, and then you brought it back. And check out the other.
Maybe move around a little bit more, just to keep us a little bit of our attention moving with you.
Yeah, I think it was really nice. It's very good. I think you managed our expectations exceedingly well. You set the bar like, hey, I'm going to be super nervous and be horrible, and then you did great. So well done. Yeah, that was good psychological tricks. Well done. I mean, by all means, use them. I would try to incorporate like a clicker so you can be able to like come out and not have to run back to change progression of the PowerPoint. That would be just a thought, like just a possibility. I think that would add some professionalism just in general. But I thought your demeanor, your pacing, your volume, all really good. I think those are all really nice. Just a really solid presentation. And I liked the examples. It was really clean and simple. Yeah, very nice. Good job.
Thank you guys so much.
Is that all for today? Is there anyone left? Yeah, Mark, Hannah, Marina, Hannah. Oh, Hannah twice. Hannah, do you want to go again?
Yeah, why not?
That was a joke again, that was it.
I'm still recovering from that.